Professor Vextal stood at the front of her classroom, her forearms crossed behind her back as she watched her students file in for another day of cultural studies. The morning sun of New Eden filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the mixed group of young beings who represented 12 different species from across the hegemony. She had been teaching on this frontier world for nearly 20 years now. New Eden was considered a perfect testing ground for interspecies education, far enough from the core worlds to avoid political interference, but civilized enough to maintain proper academic standards. The planet hosted students from families of diplomats, traders, and colonial administrators. Most were here because their parents needed a safe place to educate their children while conducting business on the Outer Rim. Vextal's 6 eyes scanned the room as students took their seats. There was Crix, the young Zentari whose crystal blue skin caught the light beautifully. Next to him sat Mora, a Mokari whose tentacles were already weaving complex patterns in the air as she prepared to take notes. The Thraxian twins, Blex and Glex, were arguing quietly about some technical matter in their harsh, clicking language. And then there was Kim Day. The human sat in the 3rd row, always in the same seat, always with the same quiet expression on his face. He was 19 years old according to his files, born on one of the human colonies around Titan in their home system. His family had moved to New Eden when his father got work in the mining sector. Unlike the other students who came from wealthy or important families, Kim Day was here on a basic education grant. Humans were still relatively new to the hegemony. Their species had only made contact 40 years ago, and even now, their integration was carefully managed. The Council had classified them as Category 7 volatile species, which meant they needed constant monitoring and gentle guidance away from their more primitive instincts. Vextal had read the reports. Humans were emotional creatures, prone to violence when stressed. They formed strong tribal bonds that often led to conflicts with other groups. Their technology was impressive for such a young species, but they lacked the wisdom to use it properly. The hegemony's role was to help them grow beyond these limitations while keeping the rest of galactic civilization safe. Kim Day seemed to be a perfect example of successful human integration. He was polite, quiet, and hardworking. He never caused trouble or asked difficult questions. His grades were good but not exceptional. He spoke when spoken to but rarely volunteered answers. In many ways, he was exactly what the Council wanted humans to become. "Good morning, class," Vextal said, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Today we begin our final project for this term." The students perked up. Final projects were always interesting, and Professor Vextal was known for creative assignments that let students explore their heritage in safe, educational ways. For the next 2 weeks, each of you will prepare a presentation about your species' traditional art forms. You may choose any form of creative expression that represents your people's cultural values and history. Crix raised a hand. "Professor, do you mean like crystal singing or formation dancing?" "Exactly," Vextal nodded. "The Zentari have many beautiful traditions to choose from. The purpose of this assignment is to help you understand how art reflects the soul of a civilization." Mora's tentacles waved excitedly. "The Mokari have been weaving sound stories for thousands of years. May I demonstrate harmonic threading?" "That would be wonderful," Vextal replied. She loved seeing her students connect with their heritage. It was one of the most rewarding parts of teaching mixed species classes. She continued explaining the assignment, noting how each species could explore their artistic traditions. The Thraxians could work with biosculptures. The Kelrathi students might demonstrate their famous memory paintings. Even the young Vorthon in the back row could share the mathematical beauty of his people's equation poetry. Throughout her explanation, Vextal noticed that Kim Day was listening carefully, but his expression seemed thoughtful in a way she had never seen before. Usually, the human student took notes dutifully and nodded at appropriate times. Today, he looked almost concerned. "Are there any questions?" she asked as she finished outlining the requirements. Several hands went up with typical student concerns about length, format, and grading criteria. Vextal answered each one patiently. Just as she was about to dismiss the class, Kim Day raised his hand. "Professor Vextal," he said in his quiet voice, "would it be possible for me to have a few extra days? I may need some special materials that I'll have to get from the human district." Vextal tilted her head, curious. In all her years teaching, Kim Day had never asked for special accommodation. He always completed his work on time and never needed additional resources. "What kind of materials?" she asked. Kim Day hesitated for a moment. "It's hard to explain without showing you. The art form I want to demonstrate requires some items that aren't usually found in academic supply stores." The other students were watching now. It was rare for Kim Day to draw attention to himself, and his classmates seemed as surprised as their professor. "How much additional time would you need?" Vextal asked. 3 days should be enough," Kim Day replied. "I understand if that creates problems with the schedule." Vextal considered the request. The boy had never caused any trouble and had earned the extra consideration through consistent good behavior. Besides, she was genuinely curious about what humans considered traditional art. Most of the species in her class had well-documented cultural practices, but human art forms were still being studied and cataloged by hegemony researchers. Very well, she decided. "You may have until Thursday of next week to present, but I expect your project to be worth the extra time." "Thank you, Professor," Kim Day said with a small bow of his head. As the other students gathered their belongings and began discussing their own projects, Vextal noticed that Kim Day seemed lost in thought. He packed his materials slowly, as if working through some complex problem in his mind. After the classroom emptied, Vextal remained at her desk updating her lesson notes. She found herself wondering about Kim Day's mysterious project. In her experience, humans were fairly straightforward in their artistic expression. They had music, visual arts, and performance traditions that were similar to many other species, if somewhat more emotionally intense. What could possibly require special materials from the human district? And why had Kim Day seemed almost reluctant to ask for the extension? She made a mental note to check in with him during the week. As his teacher, it was her responsibility to guide him toward appropriate cultural expression while ensuring he stayed within the bounds of acceptable human behavior. The afternoon sun was getting lower as Vextal finally packed up her teaching materials. Outside her window, she could see the sprawling human settlement on the edge of the city. It was a modest community, mostly working families who had come to New Eden for opportunities in mining, agriculture, or basic services. She had visited the human district a few times for official educational outreach, but had never spent much time there. The humans seemed to keep to themselves, which the council considered a positive sign of successful integration. They weren't trying to spread their culture or challenge established norms. As she locked her classroom, Vextal found herself looking forward to Kim Day's presentation. After 20 years of teaching, she thought she understood her students well. But there was something different about the way Kim Day had asked for those extra days. Something that suggested his project might be more interesting than she had initially expected. She had no idea that in 1 week's time, that quiet human student would change everything she thought she knew about his species, about her own government, and about the true nature of the galaxy they all shared. For now, though, it was simply another day at the end of another semester, with one small mystery to look forward to solving. Kim Day walked through the main street of New Eden's human district as the afternoon sun cast long shadows between the simple buildings. The area was modest compared to the gleaming towers of the alien sectors, but it felt like home. Human children played in small gardens while their parents worked on repairs or tended to their daily business. The human settlement had grown slowly over the past 15 years. Most families here worked in jobs that other species found too dangerous or too boring: mining operations, waste processing, basic maintenance, and agricultural work. The Hegemony Council considered these perfect occupations for humans. Simple. Work that kept them busy and useful without giving them access to sensitive technology or information. Kim Day knew better. He stopped first at the scrapyard where Lee Hanna worked. She was 28 years old, officially listed as a recycling technician. Her job was to sort through discarded materials from the various alien communities and prepare them for processing. What the Hegemony monitors didn't understand was that Hanna had been an advanced systems engineer back on Titan before her family moved to New Eden. "Day," she called out when she saw him approaching. "How did your classes go today?" "I need your help with something," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no surveillance drones were watching. "For school." Hanna set down the piece of equipment she had been examining. It looked like broken computer parts to casual observers, but Kim Day could see the careful way she had been studying the internal components. "What kind of help?" she asked. "Professor Vextal wants us to do a presentation about traditional human art," Kim Day explained. "I want to show them something real." Hanna's expression grew serious. She understood immediately what he meant. The Hegemony had very specific ideas about what human culture should look like. They approved of simple music, basic visual arts, and folk stories that emphasized cooperation and peaceful values. Anything that might demonstrate human technical ability or strategic thinking was quietly discouraged. "That could be dangerous," she said carefully. "You know how they watch us." "I know," Kim Day replied. "But I think it's time." They walked deeper into the scrapyard, away from the main entrance. Hanna led him to a small workshop area where she kept items that required more detailed examination. The space was cluttered, with components that appeared broken or worthless, but Kim Day recognized many pieces of advanced technology that had been cleverly disguised. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Hanna asked. Kim Day pulled out a drawing he had been working on for months. It showed a complex device that looked like abstract sculpture, but incorporated elements of fusion technology, quantum processors, and gravitational manipulation systems. All of it designed to appear like an art project to casual observation. Hanna studied the design for several minutes. Her eyes widened as she began to understand the full scope of what he was proposing. "This isn't just art," she whispered. "This is a working demonstration of human engineering principles." "Exactly," Kim Day said, "but presented as cultural expression." "The materials alone," Hanna began, then stopped herself. She looked around the workshop, mentally cataloging components. "Actually, I think we can do this. Most of what you need is here, just hidden in different forms." They spent the next hour going through the design, identifying which pieces could be salvaged or modified. Hanna pulled out items that looked like scrap metal but were actually rare alloys. She showed him circuit boards that appeared damaged but could be repaired and repurposed. Even the power source could be built from components that the aliens had thrown away as worthless. "How long do we have?" she asked. 3 extra days, so about a week total." "We'll need help," Hanna said. "This is too complex for just the two of us." Their next stop was the home of Park Soon, an elderly man who ran a small repair shop for basic household items. Officially, he fixed cooking equipment and cleaning devices. Unofficially, Park Soon had been one of Earth's leading experts in quantum mechanics before he volunteered to join the colonial program. Park Soon listened to their plan without interruption. When they finished explaining, he sat quietly for a long time, stroking his gray beard. "You understand what this means," he finally said. "If the Hegemony realizes what you're really showing them, everything changes." "Maybe it's time for everything to change," Kim Day replied. Park Soon nodded slowly. "Your generation has more courage than mine did. We were content to hide and wait, but perhaps waiting has gone on long enough. He agreed to help with the more complex technical aspects of the project. His repair shop had tools that could work at the molecular level, hidden inside equipment that appeared to be simple welding devices. Over the next 3 days, word spread quietly through the human community. Families began contributing materials and expertise without being asked directly. Jiang Wu, another human student from Kim Dae's school, tried to convince him to choose a safer topic. "Why not just play some traditional music?" Jiang Wu argued as they walked home from classes. "Or show them some paintings? Nobody gets in trouble for paintings." "Because that's not who we really are," Kim Dae answered. "We're not simple people who only know how to paint pretty pictures. We're builders and dreamers and explorers. Why should we pretend to be less than we are?" "Because it keeps us safe," Jiang Wu said. "The hegemony likes us the way we are now, quiet and harmless." "Do they like us?" Kim Dae asked. "Or do they just tolerate us as long as we stay small?" Meanwhile, Professor Vextal was receiving daily reports from the automated monitoring systems that tracked activity in the human district. The reports showed increased movement between homes, more time spent in workshops, and several purchases of materials that seemed unusual for typical human activities. Her supervisor, Administrator Korth, called her into his office on Wednesday. "Your human student is causing quite a stir in their community," Korth said, his multiple eyes focusing on her with uncomfortable intensity. "Are you certain this assignment is appropriate?" "It's a simple cultural presentation," Vextal replied. "Every species does them. Other species don't require monitoring," Korth pointed out. "Other species don't have families gathering in secret workshops to help with school projects." Vextal felt a small flutter of concern. "Are you suggesting I cancel his presentation?" "I'm suggesting you remember that humans require careful management," Korth said. "They have tendencies toward unpredictable behavior when they organize together." That evening, Vextal found herself looking out her office window toward the human district. Small lights glowed in workshop windows, and she could see people moving between buildings with purpose. It looked like a community coming together to support one of their young people. She had seen similar behavior from other species when students worked on important projects. Families and neighbors contributing time and resources to help their children succeed. It was considered a positive sign of cultural values and community strength. So why did the same behavior from humans make the administrators nervous? Kim Dae spent his evenings working alongside adults who treated him with respect and seriousness. They didn't talk down to him or try to limit his ambitions. Instead, they shared knowledge and techniques that had been carefully hidden for years. By Thursday evening, the project was nearly complete. It looked exactly like what Kim Dae had promised. An abstract sculpture that incorporated elements of traditional Korean design philosophy, with flowing lines and balanced proportions that would appeal to any art teacher. But underneath the artistic exterior was something far more significant. A functioning demonstration of human innovation that would reveal capabilities the hegemony had never suspected. As Kim Dae made final adjustments to his creation, Park soon placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready for what comes next?" the old man asked. "Once you show them this, there's no going back to the way things were." Kim Dae looked at the device, then at the faces of the people who had helped him build it. People who had been hiding their true abilities for decades, waiting for the right moment to show the galaxy what humanity could really do. "I'm ready," he said. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies and an unusual tension in Professor Vextal's classroom. Word had spread among the students that Kim Dae's presentation would be something special. Even students from other classes had found excuses to linger in the hallway, curious about what the quiet human student had prepared. Vextal noticed several things that seemed different as students filed in. Kim Dae arrived precisely on time, carrying what appeared to be a metal sculpture about the size of a backpack. The device was elegant in its simplicity, with flowing curves that suggested traditional artistic influences. but there was something about the way he handled it that suggested it was more complex than it appeared. She also noticed that Jiang Wu, the other human student, seemed nervous. He kept glancing at Kim Dae with an expression that mixed worry and excitement. Several alien students were whispering among themselves, clearly sensing that something unusual was about to happen. "Good morning, class," Vextal began. "Today we continue our cultural presentations. Who would like to go first?" Crix raised a hand eagerly. "I can present my crystal formation, Professor." For the next hour, students shared their traditional art forms. Crix demonstrated how Zentari artists grew living crystals that sang in harmony with their creators' emotions. The sound filled the classroom with beautiful, ringing tones that made everyone feel peaceful and calm. Mora followed with her sound-weaving demonstration. Her tentacles moved in complex patterns while she hummed in frequencies that most species couldn't hear. The result was a three-dimensional sculpture made of pure sound that told the story of her people's journey to the stars. The Thraxian twins presented a biosculpture that grew and changed as they fed it nutrients. Within minutes, the living artwork had transformed from a simple seed into a complex organism that displayed patterns representing their species' history. Each presentation was exactly what Vextal expected. Beautiful, culturally appropriate, and safely within the bounds of acceptable student work. The alien students applauded politely for each demonstration, clearly impressed by their classmates' heritage. Finally, it was Kim Dae's turn. He stood and carefully lifted his sculpture, carrying it to the front of the classroom with both hands. The device was heavier than it looked, and Vextal could see intricate details that hadn't been visible from a distance. What she had taken for simple decorative elements appeared to be functional components arranged in pleasing patterns. "This piece represents a concept from my people's culture called Zhong," Kim Dae began, his voice steady but carrying an emotional weight that made everyone listen more carefully. "Zhong is difficult to translate into other languages. It means deep, affection and loyalty, but also emotional connection and genuine care for others." He placed the sculpture on the demonstration table and activated something on its base. Immediately, a soft humming filled the room, similar to the sound of Zentari crystals, but deeper and more complex. "Humans don't just feel Zhong," Kim Dae continued. "We build it into everything we create. Every tool, every building, every ship that carries us between the stars. We pour our emotions into our work because we believe that technology without heart is dangerous." The humming grew stronger, and small lights began appearing within the sculpture's curved sections. But these weren't simple decorative lights. They were displaying information, creating patterns that looked like star charts and technical diagrams. Vextal felt the first flutter of concern. This was beginning to look less like art and more like a technical demonstration. "Professor," whispered Mora, her tentacles weaving nervously. "Is this normal for human art?" Before Vextal could answer, Kim Dae's sculpture began projecting holographic images into the air above it. The classroom filled with three-dimensional displays showing cities, ships, and technologies that looked far more advanced than anything the hegemony attributed to human civilization. "This is our home city on Titan," Kim Dae explained as the hologram showed a sprawling metropolis with buildings that seemed to heal themselves as they sustained damage. "We built it to love its people. The walls know when someone is sick and adjust the air to help them recover. The streets rearrange themselves to help lost children find their way home." The alien students stared in stunned silence. The city in the hologram was clearly more advanced than most hegemony settlements, with technology that appeared to think and feel rather than simply function. "Our ships sing to each other across the void," Kim Dae continued as the display changed, to show vessels that looked nothing like the simple transport craft humans were supposed to use. These ships moved like living things, their hulls rippling with energy patterns that suggested consciousness rather than mere automation. "They carry Messages of hope and love between our colonies. When a human ship is in distress, every other human ship in the sector feels its pain. Vextal stood up abruptly. Kim Day, I think that's enough for today. But the young human didn't stop. If anything, his voice grew stronger and more passionate. Even our weapons choose mercy over destruction, he said as the hologram showed devices that looked capable of devastating entire planets, but were somehow designed to minimize casualties. We created them to protect the things we love, not to destroy what we fear. The classroom erupted in confused murmurs. Several students were trying to record the presentation on their personal devices, but the holograms seemed to interfere with their equipment. Only the images that Kim Day wanted them to see remained clear and stable. This is impossible, breathed Blex, one of the Thraxian twins. Humans are Category 7. They don't have this level of technology. Kim Day turned to look directly at Vextal. His expression was sad but determined. We've been hiding, Professor. For 40 years, we've been pretending to be smaller and simpler than we really are. We thought if we stayed quiet and didn't threaten anyone, we could eventually find a place in the galaxy where we belonged. The holographic display shifted to show human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems. Not the handful of settlements that hegemony records showed, but a vast network of worlds connected by technologies that seemed to blend science with something approaching magic. We have cities that dream, Kim Day said softly. Ships that love, their crews so much they refuse to let them die. Gardens that sing lullabies to human children born under alien suns. We create all of this not because we want to conquer or control, but because we want to care for each other and for anyone who will let us. Vextal's forearms were shaking as she reached for the emergency communication device on her desk. But she found herself hesitating. The images Kim Day was showing weren't threatening or aggressive. They were beautiful in a way that touched something deep in her consciousness. Why are you showing us this? Asked Crix, his crystal skin flickering with patterns of confusion and awe. Kim Day looked around the classroom at his fellow students. Some appeared frightened, others amazed, but all of them were listening with complete attention. Because I wanted you to understand what Zhong really means, he said. It means caring about someone even when you don't have to. It means building something beautiful, not because it benefits you, but because it makes the universe a little bit better for everyone. He gestured to the holographic displays that still filled the air around them. Humans have been loving this galaxy from a distance for a very long time. We're ready to love it up close, if you'll let us. The sculpture's humming reached a crescendo and then suddenly stopped. The holograms faded away, leaving only silence and the lingering scent of ozone in the air. Kim Day looked directly at Professor Vextal. Thank you for letting me express myself, he said quietly. Then he sat down and waited for whatever would happen next. Within minutes, Vextal knew security forces would be storming into her classroom. Everything would change, not just for Kim Day, but for every human in hegemony, space, and possibly for the hegemony itself. The assignment had been simple. Express yourself through traditional art. Kim Day had done exactly that, and in doing so, he had expressed the true heart of what it meant to be human. The silence in Professor Vextal's classroom lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the doors burst open, and hegemony security forces flooded into the room with weapons drawn and scanning devices active. Director Multhar entered. Behind them, his massive form filling the doorway. His species, the Corvan, were known for their intimidating appearance and their role as the hegemony's primary enforcers. 6 feet tall with armored skin and multiple sensory organs, Multhar had built his career on maintaining order among the galaxy's more troublesome species. Everyone remain seated, he commanded in a voice that made the walls vibrate. This classroom is now under official investigation. The alien students pressed themselves back in their chairs, clearly terrified. Even the usually confident Zentari and Thraxian students looked small and vulnerable in the presence of so much official authority. Malthar's attention focused immediately on Kim Day, who sat calmly at his desk with his hands folded. The human student showed no sign of fear or surprise, as if he had been expecting this moment. "You," Malthar pointed one clawed finger at Kim Day. "Stand up slowly and step away from that device." Kim Day obeyed without resistance. As he moved, away from his sculpture, 3 security specialists surrounded it with scanning equipment. Their devices immediately began registering readings that made them exchange worried glances. "Director," one of the specialists called out, "this isn't just an art project. The energy signatures suggest fusion technology, quantum processing, and gravitational manipulation systems." Malthar's multiple eyes focused on Professor Vextal with laser intensity. "You allowed a Category 7 species to demonstrate advanced military technology in your classroom." "It was supposed to be a cultural presentation," Vextal stammered. "He said it represented traditional human art." "Traditional human art does not include functional fusion reactors," Malthar replied coldly. "Traditional human art does not project classified intelligence about undiscovered human colonies." He gestured to his security team, who immediately began escorting Kim Day toward the door. The young human went quietly, but before leaving, he turned back to address his classmates one final time. "I'm sorry if I scared any of you," he said. "That was never my intention. I just wanted you to know who humans really are instead of who we've been pretending to be." Jiang Wu started to stand up, but a security officer pushed him back into his seat. The other human student's face showed a mixture of fear and admiration for what his friend had just accomplished. After Kim Day was removed, Malthar ordered the classroom sealed. All recording devices were confiscated, and each student was questioned individually about what they had witnessed. The official story would be that a human student had experienced a psychological breakdown and created dangerous hallucinations during his presentation. But the students knew what they had seen. The images of advanced human cities and technology had been too detailed and too real to dismiss as mental illness. 2 hours later, Professor Vextal found herself in Director Malthar's office, facing the most serious charges of her teaching career. 23 years of service to the hegemony, Malthar said as he reviewed her personnel file. Excellent performance ratings, multiple commendations for successful interspecies education, and now this. I had no idea what the human was planning. Vextal insisted. His previous work was always appropriate and conventional. That's the problem, Malthar replied. You've been teaching humans for 3 years, and you never suspected that they were hiding their true capabilities. He activated a holographic display that showed intelligence reports from across hegemony space. The documents were classified, far above Vextal's security level, but Malthar wanted her to understand the full scope of what had happened. What your student demonstrated today wasn't just advanced technology, he explained. It was a confirmation of our worst fears about the human species. The hologram showed star charts with human settlements marked in red. But instead of the dozen colonies that public records indicated, there were hundreds of human worlds scattered across 3 different galactic arms. For 40 years, we've been tracking what we thought was a small, primitive species learning to integrate with galactic civilization, Malthar continued. In reality, humanity has been expanding at a rate that exceeds any known species in recorded history. Vextal stared at the display in shock. The human expansion covered territory that would make them one of the largest civilizations in the galaxy, rivaling even the hegemony itself in scope and influence. The fusion technology your student demonstrated is centuries beyond what we believed humans possessed, Malthar said. Our analysis suggests that a single human colony ship could generate more power than our largest military installations. He switched the display to show technical specifications that made Vextal's academic mind real. Human ships weren't the simple transport vessels that hegemony inspectors had examined. They were mobile fortress cities with defensive capabilities. that could protect entire star systems. But the most disturbing aspect, Molthar continued, is the evidence of emotional intelligence integration in their technology. Those ships your student showed aren't just machines. They appear to have some form of consciousness that bonds with their human crews. Vexatal remembered Kim Day's words about humans building love into their technology. At the time, she had thought it was just poetic language. Now she realized he had been speaking literally. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Yes, it does," Molthar agreed. "Which is why you're being charged with negligent exposure of classified threat assessment. Information. Your failure to properly monitor and control your human student has compromised galactic security." But even as Molthar spoke about charges and consequences, Vextal found herself thinking about Kim Day's presentation. The images he had shown weren't of weapons or military installations. They were of cities that cared for their inhabitants, ships that protected their crews, and gardens that sang to children. "Director," she said carefully, "what if we've been wrong about humans all along?" Molthar's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting that a species capable of hiding their true technological level for 4 decades might be peaceful?" "I'm suggesting that maybe their technology isn't designed for war," Vextal replied. "Everything Kim Day showed us seemed focused on protection and care, not conquest or destruction." "Professor," Molthar said with barely controlled patience, "a species that can hide city-sized starships and multi-system colonies for 40 years is not to be trusted, regardless of their stated intentions." In a detention facility on the other side of New Eden, Kim Day sat in a holding cell designed for Category 7 species. The room was comfortable but secure, with monitoring systems that tracked his vital signs and emotional state. He wasn't alone. Lee Hanna, Park Soon, and 6 other adults from the human community had been arrested for conspiracy and technological violations. The hegemony had discovered their hidden workshops and confiscated equipment that revealed the true scope of human engineering capabilities. Through the cell's communication system, Kim Day could hear his lawyer, Choi Min-jae, arguing with detention officials about basic legal rights. Min-jae was officially listed as a paralegal assistant, but Kim Day knew he had been one of Earth's most successful civil rights attorneys before joining the colonial program. "They're scared," Park Soon said, quietly from the next cell. "More scared than we've ever seen them." "Good," replied Lee Hanna from across the corridor. "Maybe now they'll listen instead of just managing us." Kim Day stared out the small window of his cell toward the human district. He could see lights in windows and people moving between buildings. Life was continuing, but he knew everything had changed. Tomorrow, news of his presentation would begin spreading to other worlds. Human communities across the galaxy would have to decide whether to continue hiding or to follow his example and reveal themselves. The assignment had been to express himself through traditional art. He had done exactly that, showing the universe what it meant to be human in the most honest way he knew how. Now the galaxy would have to decide what to do with the truth. The Hegemony High Court on the capital world of Nexus Prime had not seen such crowds in over a century. Beings from dozens of species filled every available seat, while millions more across the galaxy watched the proceedings through official broadcasts. The case of Professor Vexatal had become something far larger than anyone had expected. Prosecutor Catherine stood before the 7-judge panel, her silver skin reflecting the courtroom lights as she presented the case against the Zentari. "Professor." Behind her, displays showed evidence that had shocked the Hegemony Council to its core. "Honorable judges," Catherine began, her voice carrying the weight of galactic law. "What we face today is not simply the case of one teacher's negligence. We face a fundamental threat to the security and stability of our civilization." She gestured to a holographic display that showed star charts with human settlements marked across vast sections of space. The number had grown since Kim Dae's presentation, as intelligence services identified colonies that had been successfully hidden for decades. The defendant allowed a human student to reveal information that has destabilized our understanding of the galactic balance of power, Catherine continued. Evidence shows that humanity has been conducting the largest deception in recorded history. The prosecutor activated recordings from Kim Dae's presentation, showing the advanced cities and ships that had stunned his classmates. But now the images were accompanied by analysis from hegemony scientists who had spent weeks studying the implications. These are not the primitive settlements of a Category 7 species, Catherine explained. Analysis indicates that human fusion technology is approximately 300 years ahead of our current capabilities. Their ships incorporate consciousness integration that our greatest minds consider impossible. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Many of the observers were learning these details for the first time, as the hegemony had tried to keep the full scope of human capabilities classified. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, we have discovered that human colonies exist in sectors we believe to be unexplored. Their expansion rate suggests a level of organization and planning that could only come from a species actively working to surround and potentially threaten hegemony space. Judge Kekstar, the eldest member of the panel, leaned forward. Prosecutor, are you suggesting that humanity has been preparing for war? I am suggesting, Your Honor, that a species capable of hiding their true nature for 40 years while expanding to this extent cannot be trusted, regardless of their stated intentions. Catherine then called her primary witness, Director Molthar, whose testimony painted a picture of humanity as a carefully controlled threat that had suddenly become uncontainable. The human student's presentation wasn't just cultural expression, Molthar testified. It was a deliberate revelation designed to force our hand. They chose the moment and manner of disclosure to maximize psychological impact. When it was time for the defense, Yexamora, Professor Vextal's attorney, stood before the court with a very different perspective. Honorable judges, she began, my client stands accused of negligence in allowing truth to be spoken in her classroom. But I submit that the real negligence lies in 40 years of willful ignorance by the hegemony leadership. Yexamora activated her own displays, showing communication records between hegemony administrators and human representatives over the decades. The pattern that emerged was troubling for the prosecution's case. These records show that humans have repeatedly attempted to share information about their capabilities, she explained. Each time, hegemony officials discouraged such revelations, preferring to maintain the fiction that humans were a simple, primitive species. The defense attorney called Professor Vextal to the stand. The Zentari educator had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that her testimony could influence the future relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Professor, Yexamora asked, in your 3 years of teaching human students, did you ever observe anything that suggested they were hiding advanced capabilities? Vextal considered the question carefully. Looking back, yes. Kim Dae and other human students often seem to understand complex concepts more quickly than their official education records suggested. They ask questions that showed deeper knowledge than they should have possessed. And why didn't you report these observations? Because I was following official policy, Vextal replied. The hegemony educational guidelines specifically instructed teachers to discourage human students from demonstrating advanced knowledge or technical abilities. This revelation caused an uproar in the courtroom. Many observers were learning for the first time that the hegemony had been actively suppressing human capabilities rather than simply underestimating them. Judge Morathan called for order, then addressed Vextal directly. Professor, are you testifying that the hegemony deliberately prevented humans from revealing their true abilities? Yes, Your Honor. The policy was designed to maintain social stability by keeping humans in roles that other species found comfortable and non-threatening. The defense then called a surprise witness, who changed the entire nature of the trial. Ambassador Li Bongsu materialized in the courtroom via secure holographic link from Earth itself. The appearance of a human diplomatic representative caused immediate chaos. No human had ever addressed the Hegemony High Court directly, and many in the audience had never seen an adult human in formal diplomatic attire. "Honorable judges," Ambassador Li said calmly, "I come before this court to provide testimony that may help resolve the questions raised by young Kim Dae's presentation." Prosecutor Catherine objected immediately. "Your Honors, this witness was not disclosed in advance and represents a potential security risk." "I'll allow the testimony," Judge Kekstar ruled. "These proceedings concern humanity directly. They have a right to speak in their own defense." Ambassador Li activated his own holographic displays, showing documents that made everyone in the courtroom fall silent. They were hegemony intelligence reports dating back to first contact, but viewed from the human perspective. 43 years ago, hegemony survey ships encountered human vessels near the edge of what you now call Sector 15, the ambassador began. "Your official records state that humans were discovered to be a primitive species just beginning interstellar travel." The display showed the real first contact records, revealing that human ships had been monitoring hegemony expansion for decades before making themselves known. "The truth is that humanity chose to make contact," Ambassador Li continued. "We had been observing the hegemony's formation and growth with great interest. When we finally introduced ourselves, we discovered that our technological capabilities frightened your leadership." He showed communication logs from those early diplomatic meetings, where hegemony officials had explicitly requested that humans hide their advanced technology to avoid causing panic among member species. "We agreed to this arrangement," the ambassador explained, "because we believed that patience and understanding would eventually lead to genuine friendship. We accepted Category 7 classification and allowed our people to live under restrictions because we hoped to prove that humans could be trusted neighbors." Judge Lensari asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Ambassador, if humans are as advanced as these records suggest, why didn't you simply refuse hegemony restrictions?" "Ambassador," Li smiled sadly, "because we didn't want to be conquerors, Your Honor. We wanted to be friends. We believed that if we demonstrated our peaceful intentions over time, the galaxy would eventually accept us as equals." The courtroom erupted in discussions that the judges couldn't control. The revelation that humans had voluntarily accepted decades of restrictions and limitations changed everything about how their recent expansion could be interpreted. "Young Kim Dae's presentation," the ambassador continued when order was restored, "was not an act of aggression or deception. It was the plea of a generation that has grown tired of hiding who they are. They want to contribute to galactic civilization, openly, using their full capabilities to help solve problems and explore new possibilities." As the trial continued, evidence emerged that completely reframed the human situation. Far from being a hidden threat, humanity had been acting as a protective force, quietly dealing with dangers that could have threatened hegemony space while allowing the credit to go to other species. Rogue asteroid impacts, stellar phenomena, and even pirate activities in remote sectors had been addressed by human forces working in secret. The primitive species had been serving as unpaid guardians for a galaxy that didn't know they existed. When the testimony concluded, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Professor Vextal's trial had become something unprecedented, the moment when the galaxy learned the truth about humanity's place in the cosmic community. The judges retired to consider their verdict, but everyone knew that their decision would determine far more than one teacher's fate. They would be deciding whether the galaxy was ready to acknowledge humanity as an equal partner in galactic civilization. The Hegemony High Court had been in recess for 3 days, while the 7 judges deliberated. Across the galaxy, billions of beings waited for a decision that would reshape their understanding of galactic civilization. But before the court could reconvene, events began unfolding that would make their verdict almost irrelevant. On the morning of the fourth day, Ambassador Lee Bong-soo requested an emergency session to present new evidence. When the court reconvened, the ambassador's holographic image appeared alongside a figure that sent shockwaves through the assembled observers. Standing next to Ambassador Lee was Kim Dae himself, no longer in detention clothing but wearing the formal robes of a human diplomatic representative. "Honorable judges," Ambassador Lee began, "recent events have forced humanity to accelerate our timeline for full disclosure. What I'm about to reveal will explain not only the truth about human capabilities, but the real reason behind our 40-year deception." He activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as most beings had never seen it. Instead of the relatively peaceful region that hegemony maps depicted, this view revealed threats that had been hidden from public knowledge for decades. The hegemony was founded 200 years ago as a defensive alliance against a force that your leaders called the Void Seekers, Ambassador Lee explained. These entities consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They were considered the greatest threat to galactic civilization. Judge Kekstar leaned forward. "The Void Seekers were defeated over a century ago. That's established historical fact." "No, Your Honor," Ambassador Lee replied calmly. "They were contained, and they've been contained by humanity for the past 43 years. The display shifted to show human ships patrolling the edge of known space, monitoring energy signatures that indicated Void Seeker activity in adjacent dimensions. The vessels were massive beyond anything the hegemony had imagined, built for a war that most of the galaxy didn't know was still being fought. When we first encountered hegemony expansion, we realized that your civilization was heading directly toward regions where Void Seeker incursions were becoming more frequent," the ambassador continued. "We made contact not to join your community but to protect it." Kim Dae stepped forward to address the court directly. His voice carried a weight and maturity that surprised everyone who remembered him as a quiet student. "The art project I presented wasn't just about human culture," he said. "It was about love as a strategic principle. Humans learned long ago that the Void Seekers feed on fear, hatred, and despair. The only defense against them is technology built with positive emotions, operated by beings who care more about protecting others than destroying enemies." The holographic display showed human cities again, but now the observers understood what they were really seeing. Those self-healing buildings weren't just comfortable homes. They were fortifications designed to withstand dimensional attacks. The ships that sang to each other weren't just expressing artistic beauty. They were maintaining quantum harmonics that kept reality stable in regions where the Void Seekers had weakened the fabric of space. "For 40 years, Ambassador Lee continued, human forces have been fighting a war that we couldn't tell you about. The Void Seekers grow stronger when civilizations know they exist. Fear and panic make them easier to detect and attack. So we agreed to be seen as primitive and harmless while secretly serving as your guardians." Prosecutor Catherine stood up, her silver skin flickering with patterns of confusion and disbelief. "Are you claiming that humans have been protecting the hegemony while pretending to be an inferior species?" "Yes," Ambassador Lee replied simply. "And we're very good at it. In the past 4 decades, we've prevented 17 major Void Seeker incursions that would have consumed entire sectors of hegemony space. Your people never knew because we made sure the threats were eliminated before they became detectable." Judge Morathan asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "If this is true, why reveal it now? Why risk exposing this threat to public knowledge?" Kim Dae answered. "Because my generation is tired of hiding, and because the Void Seekers are becoming more aggressive. We need the galaxy to understand that this war isn't over, and we can't fight it alone anymore." The display showed current threat assessments that painted a grim picture. Void Seeker activity was increasing across multiple dimensional barriers, and human forces were being stretched to their limits trying to contain incursions across such a vast area. "We need allies who understand what they're fighting for," Kim Dae continued. We need civilizations that can build technology with love instead of fear. We need the galaxy to grow beyond the need for protection and become partners in something greater. Ambassador Lee activated a final display that showed the true scope of human civilization. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of ships, millions of people all working together with a single purpose, protecting a galaxy that didn't know they existed. The assignment was to express yourself through traditional art, Kim Dae said, addressing Professor Vextal directly. I chose to show Zhong because it's the only force that can defeat the darkness that threatens us all. Humans have been expressing Zhong on a galactic scale for 40 years. We're ready to teach others to do the same. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the implications became clear. Humanity hadn't been hiding their capabilities out of deception or preparation for conquest. They had been protecting their neighbors, while allowing those neighbors to believe they were safe on their own. Judge Kextar was the first to speak. This changes everything. Yes, Ambassador Lee agreed. The question now is what the galaxy chooses to do with the truth. Professor Vextal stood up in the defendant's area. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. Granted. I have taught interspecies relations for over 20 years, she began. I thought I understood the importance of cultural exchange and mutual respect, but I never imagined that one of my students would teach me the most important lesson of my career. She looked directly at Kim Dae. You showed us that true strength isn't about hiding your capabilities or using them to dominate others. True strength is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, even when they don't know they need protection. The judges huddled in conference for only a few minutes before Judge Kextar announced their decision. In the matter of Professor Vextal's alleged negligence, this court finds the defendant not guilty. Furthermore, we commend her for facilitating one of the most important educational experiences in galactic history. But the verdict was almost anticlimactic compared to what happened next. Judge Lensari addressed Ambassador Lee directly. On behalf of the Hegemony High Court, I formally request that humanity consider full partnership status in galactic civilization. We offer our resources, our knowledge, and our commitment to learning the principles that have made your protection of this galaxy possible. Ambassador Lee smiled, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked genuinely hopeful. We accept, he said, and we invite every species in the hegemony to visit human worlds, to see how we build with love instead of fear, and to join us in creating a galaxy where everyone can express their true selves without hiding who they are. Kim Dae stepped forward one final time. The assignment was to express yourself through traditional art. I showed you Zhong because I wanted you to understand that humans create from the heart. We thought if you understood that, maybe we could be real friends instead of just protectors watching from the shadows. 6 months later, Professor Vextal stood in her classroom on New Eden, but everything had changed. Her students now included beings from species that had never interacted before, all learning together about the principles of love-based technology and emotional engineering. Kim Dae sat in his usual seat in the third row, but now he served as a cultural liaison between human and alien students. His quiet presence had become a bridge between civilizations that were learning to trust each other in ways they never thought possible. On the walls of the classroom hung images from human worlds, showing cities that sang with joy and ships that carried messages of hope between the stars. But they also displayed contributions from other species who were learning to build with positive emotions rather than fear and competition. The galaxy was changing, one classroom at a time, one student at a time, one expression of Zhong at a time. The assignment had been simple. Express yourself through traditional art. But Kim Dae had done something far more important. He had expressed the true heart of what it meant to be human, and in doing so, he had taught the galaxy what it could mean to be family. And in the end, that was the most beautiful art of all.